So, now that we have an ethical framework on how to deal with questions related to globalization, let's talk about sweatshops. The term sweatshop has actually nothing to do with sweat, but around 1830-ish, a sweater was the middleman between the workers and the clothing company. So a sweatshop refers to a factory or workshop, especially in the clothing industry, where manual workers were historically employed at very low wages for long hours and under poor working conditions. Between 1850 and 1900, sweatshops attracted the rural poor and immigrants to rapidly growing cities such as London in the UK and New York City. However, today most sweatshops are found in Asia and Central America. In Bangladesh, for example, 4,500 factories employ over 3.5 million workers and produce roughly 80% of the country's total exports. So the question becomes, are sweatshops good or bad for developing countries and their citizens? Well, there are some beneficial aspects to sweatshops, and I don't mean that you get to buy cheap clothes. The poorest workers in developing countries often work in the informal sector that is not monitored or regulated by the government. That means that any safety regulations or minimum pay requirements are not enforced. Consequently, the poorest workers earn less than half of what the formal sector is required to pay. By working for Nike, for example, teenagers can not just make twice as much, but sometimes 5 to 7 times as much as their family members who work on farms in rural Indonesia or Bangladesh. Moreover, workers earning minimum wage in the formal sector in Indonesia are amongst the highest paid citizens. In addition, some organizations in the informal sector do not follow any laws, as low as they might be. The working conditions in the informal sector are therefore extremely poor and often extremely hazardous. From a random sample of 25 workers at Nike's Serang plant in Indonesia, 13, so over half of them said that the working conditions are the key reason they work here, while others cited salary and benefits. In addition, developing countries often start by producing labor-intensive manufactured goods for the export markets. Over time, workers gain more skills and organizations gain more know-how and gradually export higher value items that are skill-intensive and require a relative developed industrial base. As a result, many developing countries have experienced a significant increase in living standards for all citizens. Today, you probably wouldn't think of Taiwan, South Korea, Singapore, and Hong Kong as developing countries anymore. But not too long ago, they relied heavily on sweatshops to boost their economy. However, while this all sounds great, there are also a lot of counter-arguments to sweatshops. Big multinational corporations can shift their production cheaply from one supplier to another supplier, and even from one country to another country. As a result, subcontractors have to offer the lowest price possible to attract and to retain the business of multinational corporations. The result is a bidding war and a race to the bottom at the cost of labor conditions and wages. So in the end, the workers have to risk their lives and pay the price. Similarly, countries rely heavily on taxes paid by sweatshops who operate in the formal sector, and of course related exports to boost the economy. Moreover, due to the low cost of switching manufacturing sites, countries have very little control over the international companies that operate within their borders. For example, as unions spread in South Korea and Taiwan, Nike shifted its suppliers primarily to Indonesia, China and Thailand, where they could depend on governments to suppress independent union organizing efforts. As a result, developing countries often do not enforce minimum wage or labor laws, even in the formal sector. And moreover, they do everything in their power to prevent strikes or other efforts by workers to improve working conditions or pay. In the end, low-wage workers should be better off working in sweatshops and be able to improve their future. However, because of this race to the bottom, this is currently not the case. If you would like to know more about the working conditions in sweatshops, please watch the video lesson on the syllabus. In addition, I also posted a YouTube link to Made in Bangladesh here on the slide. This 45-minute long video won the 2014 International Emmy Award for Current Affairs and discusses the events that led to the collapse of the Rana Plaza that killed over 1,100 workers in a sweatshop in Bangladesh. The video is very graphic and highlights that even Canadian companies such as Loblaws take advantage of cheap labor and extremely poor working conditions, and they do not do their part to prevent tragedies like this from happening. Now that you know the benefits and disadvantages of sweatshops, do you think that sweatshops provide more benefits or harm to workers in developing countries? Moreover, do you think that would be better for organizations to provide no job at all or to offer one that pays less than minimum wage? Maitland also provides some insights on how much multinational corporations should pay its employees and what labor standards they should follow. The home country standard means that employees in developing countries will get paid the same as employees in the home country. The idea that individuals who do the same work at different places should get paid the same might seem good at first, as it promotes equal treatment. However, pretty much no organization would outsource work to developing countries, leaving them without work. And even if they did, sweatshop workers in developing countries would earn a lot more than doctors, professors, lawyers, and so on, which subsequently would likely result in a shortage of talent in these important professions. The classical liberal standard, on the other hand, argues that supply and demand will determine the market rate and, of course, the conditions under which employees want to work. So organizations should pay market rates and offer conditions under which employees are willing to work. If they offer less or poorer working conditions, they will likely not be able to attract qualified workers. On the other hand, if they pay more, they are wasting money. I sure hope that reminds you on something we learned before. If you are thinking of Milton Friedman's stockholder theory, then you are correct. But just like stockholder theory, the wages and labor standards determined by the classical liberal standards are not supported by contemporary ethical theories. Finally, we have the living wage standard that requires organizations to pay workers enough so they can live in dignity as human beings. That means that workers who work a full-time job should make enough money to meet their basic needs, such as housing, utilities, food, clothing, transportation, healthcare, and so on. In most countries, a living wage is above the minimum wage. The living wage in Ontario in 2019 was around $18 per hour, for example, way higher than the minimum wage in 2019 of $14. But even within Ontario, it greatly varies. For example, the living wage in London, Ontario was $16.20. Hamilton, it was $16.45. In the Niagara region, it was $18.12. And the highest living wage in Ontario was, of course, in Toronto at $22.08 an hour. I would say the living wage standard is also in line with material discussed by Donaldson and Dunphy and Asghari and Michal. And of course it's supported by all three major ethical theories we discussed in the past. So, to conclude Sweatshops, think about what companies can do to set up ethical manufacturing plants in a developing country. What material discussed by Velasquez, Donaldson and Dunphy, and Asghari and Michal are the most helpful to you?